Most people think their woodworking projects fail because of their skill, but that's not what's actually happening. You can follow a plan step by step, measure carefully, use decent tools, and still end up with something that looks nothing like the picture you had in your head. Edges don't line up, joints don't close, the final piece feels slightly off, even if you can't explain why. And after a few projects like that, a quiet question starts to creep in. Am I just bad at this? That question is where a lot of people stop. Because from the outside, woodworking looks straightforward. You see a finished table, a clean bookshelf, a solid bench, and it all seems logical. Cut the wood, assemble the parts, follow the plan. But when you actually try to build something, the experience is very different. You start with motivation. You pick a project, you find a plan that looks solid enough. Maybe it even has nice images and a materials list. You clear your weekend, buy the wood, set everything up, and for the first few steps, things seem fine. Then something small happens. A measurement doesn't quite match the diagram. A step skips from cutting pieces to assembling them without showing what happens in between. You pause, reread, try to interpret what the plan probably meant. You adjust slightly, keep going. Then another issue shows up. A joint doesn't sit flush. Two pieces that should align don't. Now you're double-checking your cuts, wondering if you measured wrong. Maybe your saw drifted. Maybe your angle was off.
So you try to correct it. But every correction introduces another small inconsistency. And by the time you reach the final assembly, the project technically holds together, but it doesn't look like the picture anymore. Not quite. And that gap between what you expected and what you built is where frustration builds. Because it feels like you did everything right, but the result says otherwise. So naturally, you assume the problem is you. You assume you need more practice, better tools, more experience. But here's the part that almost nobody explains clearly. The real issue isn't your ability to build. It's the structure of the plan you're following. Most woodworking plans are designed to look complete, not to actually guide a real build from start to finish. They show the final product, they list some materials, they outline a few steps, but they leave out the invisible structure that holds the entire process together. Things like exact sequencing, what has to be done before something else. Tolerances, how precise each cut needs to be for joints to fit correctly. Assembly logic, how parts interact when they come together, not just individually. Without that structure, you're not really following a plan, you're interpreting one. And interpretation is where things start to break down. It's similar to following a recipe that skips key instructions. Imagine being told, prepare the dough, then bake, but no explanation of mixing order, temperature control, or timing. You could technically follow those instructions and still end up with something completely different from what was intended. Woodworking works the same way. Small gaps in instruction don't stay small. A difference of 1/16 of an inch might not seem like much on paper, but when multiple pieces depend on that measurement, that tiny variation compounds. One joint is slightly off, then another, and suddenly nothing aligns the way it should. From the outside, it looks like a skill issue, but structurally, it's a plan issue. And this is why so many projects stall halfway, because at some point, the plan stops making sense. And when that happens, you're forced to guess. Some people push through and finish something good enough, others stop entirely. Not because they lack motivation, but because the process stopped being reliable. Now here's where things shift. When a plan is actually built and tested before being shared, the entire experience changes. Not in a dramatic or flashy way, but in a subtle, consistent way. Each step connects logically to the next. Measurements don't just exist, they align with how the piece is assembled. Instructions don't skip the difficult parts, they walk through them. So instead of constantly second-guessing, you move forward with clarity. You're not trying to figure out what the plan meant, you're executing something that's already been proven to work, and that changes how you feel during the build. Instead of hesitation, there's momentum. Instead of doubt, there's confirmation. And instead of hoping it turns out right, you start expecting it to.
That expectation is important, because once you've experienced a project that actually comes together the way it should, clean joints, aligned parts, a finished piece that matches the vision, your entire perspective shifts. You realize the gap wasn't about talent, it was about reliability. And once that reliability is in place, everything else becomes easier to build on. Skills improve faster. Confidence builds naturally. Projects stop feeling like risks and start feeling like processes. Not perfect, but predictable. And that's what most people were missing all along. Not more effort, not better tools, but a system that removes unnecessary uncertainty from the process. Because when the structure behind the plan is solid, the outcome stops being a guess. It becomes the natural result of following something that actually works. If you want to understand what that kind of structure looks like in practice, there's a resource in the description that breaks it down step by step, not just what to build, but how the entire process fits together. You can also subscribe if you want more videos that focus on the logic behind building, not just the results. And once you start seeing the structure behind the process, the results tend to follow quietly after.